Yeah, the flavor of the like infected pirate killing people with poison damage is so sick to me. That's just pure biological warfare, straight from the mouth of Xavier Sal. That's awesome. Hello and welcome once again to an episode of the MTG Thoughtcast. We're talking all things infect, poison, toxic. Oh baby, we're getting deep into it today. Before we do any of that, my name is Joseph and I am so happy to be back in the seat. Thank you to everyone who's been watching for the last couple of weeks as I've been out because of the ice storms in Nashville. I'm back. Everything is good. We need to give a major thank you and shout out to our esteemed guests who have been filling in for me on the show the last couple of weeks. That is Brian over on Chaotic Commander. Make sure you guys go subscribe over there. And he needs no introduction, the legend himself, Dana Roach from the EDH Recast. I feel honored to even say that someone of his likes has filled in for me on the show. But it was great. And the other major thank you we obviously have to give is to across the screen or across your ears, co-host of the show. He's not toxic, not even toxic zero. He is John Kendall. John, how you doing today, mate?
It takes 10 or more poison counters to kill me.
That's right. Yeah. As does all of us. Like I said, we're going deep into some poison counters, some toxic. Maybe we're proliferating a little bit today, but yeah, John, you excited to talk about some? I see you've got your Phyrexian behind you there.
Yeah,
is that actual words or did you?
It is. Yes, and you all get to figure out what it says. That's the joke. That's your homework for today.
Wow! If you figure it out, let us know in the comments down below what John's Phyrexian says behind him. I'm very sorry to all of you Spotify listeners. I have no way to communicate. The Phyrexian, there's a single line straight down, and then there's a diagonal line, and then another. Not doing that. Let us know in the comments below if you figure out what John's Phyrexian says. While you're down there, you can give us likes, comments, and subscribes. Helps the channel out a ton for totally free. If you want to maybe write your own Phyrexian or build your own Infect or Proliferate or Poison deck, Toxic perhaps, you can jump into our Discord. We have a brewery thread. Where you can post deck lists, get advice from the two of us. It's the easiest way to get a hold of John and I here on the show. That's our Discord, link down below, totally free. And before we finally dive into all of the goodies and the goodness of today, we have to give a shout out to our one and only sponsor of the show. It's Heavy Play. Guys, I've been using these accessories for quite some time now. I backed this company on Kickstarter. I believe in them wholeheartedly. They're my favorite Magic accessories on the planet, bar none. If you want 10% off of your entire order with Heavy Play, you can go to heavyplay.com/MTG Thoughtcast or use code MTG Thoughtcast at checkout. Get yourself some sweet magnetic deck boxes and dice boxes and playmats and some curved sleeves while you're there. Dude, I've been really getting into the curved inner sleeves, even when I'm not using Heavy Play, the curved outer sleeves.
Oh yeah?
There's a recently released product from them. It is a new heavier gauge inner sleeve that just holds everything so firm. It's awesome.
Interesting.
Go and get you some sleeves and some accessories over there for a nice 10% off, and give us a little kickback while you're there. Thank you so much to Heavy Play for sponsoring the show, as always. Oh, John, it feels so good to be back in the driver's seat.
Welcome back, brother. We missed you. I'm glad you're here for the poison episode.
Absolutely, dude. It was legendary getting to watch the guest episodes. If you guys haven't watched those, make sure you go back to the last 2 weeks of episodes and check those out. Give them some love. John,
hey,
give me the details. What are we talking about today, buddy?
It's the Infect episode. We're here. This was actually by request from our Discord. Just before we got started with the Lorwyn release season, the idea of talking about a sort of the deck structure of Infect, of Poison. And this is going to be an episode that is structured in a similar fashion. If you've watched our How to Artifacts guide, we're going to go into a similar kind of breakdown. We're going to showcase for you like all of the interesting strategies and core mechanics, and especially commanders as well. Like, what could you be playing? And more so than the artifact one, this poison counters idea is so fascinating because there are a broad spectrum of like outlets that you could build your direction for this type of deck is. But Joseph, how long do you think poison counters have been in the game? I've got the fun facts here for you. Do you know when poison was introduced?
Yeah, it was like Odyssey or Mirage. It was back in that block, maybe Urza's Saga. It was around then. I can't remember the exact set, but it was introduced with like Pit Viper, I think the card is called. That was like poisonous as a mechanic before it was poisonous. That just said like, these creatures, if they're unblocked, deal no combat damage, and you get a poison counter. What set was it from, actually, John?
You're very close, sort of. The very first one who introduced the concept of players receiving poison counters, it was originally from Legends, and it was on the card...
Legends.
It was on the card Pit Scorpion.
I was so close. You have to give me partial credit for that.
Partial credit, yes. Started in Legends, was used sporadically in and amongst the game, all the way up through to Future Sight is where they even kept doing cards very sporadically that were along the lines of like, if this thing either connects or is gone unblocked, the opponent gets poison counters. Scars of Mirrodin is when the mechanic as a whole, or the concept of what poison counters were, was far more fleshed out with the known mechanic that a lot of players are familiar with, Infect. And
yeah,
then,
that's the really good one.
Yeah. Sprinkled throughout again with the return to Mirrodin, with Phyrexia All Be One, with the toxic mechanic. And then since then has just been 1 or 2 drop cameo appearances here or there, as far as a card that says like, oh, if this condition is met, and a player gets poison counters. But we've gone on about all these poison counter things. What are poison counters? For those who may not be familiar on what poison counters are, it is a type of counter that you, a player, receive. Not too dissimilar to things like experience counters or energy counters or anything like that. Rad counters actually is a very close example with this as well. And it is a counter who has a game mechanic locked into it, even as early as Pit Scorpion. They straight up say that a player with 10 poison counters loses the game.
Yeah, it's the one thing that's similar across to all of the different mechanics that use poison counters. It's just a sort of baked-in condition to poison counters that if you have 10 of them on your player, you lose. So poison is a game of counting to 10, whether you're playing in standard or in, I guess toxic isn't in standard anymore. Whether you're playing in a constructed format, like a 60-card constructed format, you're playing in a singleton format like Commander, any of these things. And that's where it starts to get a little contentious and controversial is in higher life total games like Commander, should the poison mechanic adjust up as well? Should this be an adjustable slide in the same way that life total is? Like, if you're playing Standard, you have 20 life. If you're playing Commander, you have 40 life, but 10 poison counters across to both of those. So I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit, unless you want to give me your thoughts on it right now, John, on 10 poison counter in Commander.
So all I have for you is an interesting fun fact about the one format that is different for poison counters. Two-headed giant.
Is it both players have to have 20?
No, the combined have to have 15.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
That's such a strange...
That is the only format that the poison counter limit is adjusted. So yeah, as you had said, Commander, our 40 life total one, 10 is still all it takes. The only one that's adjusted is two-headed giant, and that's just kind of fascinating. Is it like, do they justify the rationale there of the 2 players having more poison because you're playing with 2 players? Would that power scale still not be like adjustable based on the higher power level and higher life that we have in Commander? But then you start thinking the backwards end of that, if poison counter limit for Commander is increased higher, does that make the mechanic worse? And I know,
so significantly worse.
And I know even right now at 10 counters, I'm pretty sure I recall that you're one of these kind of people that even at the 10 poison counters, you don't think poison is a very viable strategy, is it?
Nope, not at all. It's very funny. As far as mechanics go, I think that poison counters is one of the most overhated mechanics, where people see this idea of getting a poison counter as, I'm so close to losing the game. I have one poison counter, this thing that had Infect, this plague mirror or whatever that hit me, has given me a poison counter. And now I need to like focus all of my effort on this person. But I genuinely think that counting to 10 is hard in Commander. And it's even harder because you have to count to 10 3 times to do that. With a very small subset of cards or proliferate engines, you still need to do all these things 10 times. That it's not easier to win via poison than it is to win with combat damage. Like, it's so much easier to just win with combat damage, or like with combos, you only have to count to 2 or 3 and then you've won the game. With poison, you have to count to 30 with these like dinky little 1/1s and things like that. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about some of the other sort of more pervasive strategies of Infect as we get on through the episode, but I really think the amount of times that I've had to like small bean my plague mirror because I'm playing like the Rendmaw that just needs multiple card types, and plague mirror is an artifact creature that happens to ramp. So I'm putting that in my deck every time that I play anything that has poison counters to it. All of the sites focus on me. And I'm like, guys, I'm not the problem. If you get a poison counter from me, I promise it's not going to be a big deal. But I wonder if people have just been so hurt by Infect decks and by poison decks that it's this like trauma response whenever they see anything that says poison counter on it. But I'm here to tell you today that it's not that big of a deal. If you win via poison, I actually think you'd have an easier time winning with mill than you would with poison counters. So that's a big part of why I wanted to do this episode today, and why I was excited about doing this, is like, poison gets such a bad rep in Commander, but it's just not that good, and it's actually really fun.
Yeah, even with a precon that supports this idea as well.
Yes.
Do you remember from Phyrexia All Be one of the standalone precon decks from that collection? The other one was Boros Rebels, the Obzon one. Obzon with Ixal Scion of Atraxa. That was a standalone deck that, yeah, the core of it was kind of more focused towards the cards that said Toxic and the ability that said Corrupted, but there were reprints in that deck that included the straight up traditional Infect, and like what we're going to talk about, the heaviest support for poison counters as a whole, proliferating. That deck was built around that idea, and even then, I've never seen any of these cards out in the wild, just because like the concept is very interesting and fascinating. But like you said, you either have yours tuned in such a way that you are going to just be straight up winning with your poison counters regardless what your opponents are going to do, and that's no different than just an infinite I win the game combo straight up, or you're playing just all of the bad Infect and Toxic cards anyway, and then you just have no chance of winning.
Yes, exactly. Tell me what Ixal does for our audio-only listeners.
Oh, I'm so sorry, yes. So Ixal Scion of Atraxa is 1 in Abzan for a legendary Phyrexian Angel, is a 2/5. She's got Flying, Vigilance, and Toxic 2. Toxic was the sort of like rehash of Infect. We'll talk about Infect in specific, but Toxic, the creature when they connect, they not only receive the traditional combat damage that the creature is assigned with its own power or toughness or whatever, but based on whatever the Toxic number is, the defending player takes that much poison counters as well. So if Ixal in specific connects with somebody, they will take 2 damage and 2 poisons. It's not a replacement like Infect is. Infect just straight up does the damage as poison counters. And then
Infect was kind of a broken mechanic. We'll talk about it later. Finish the card.
Yes. Ixal then also has the other mechanic that came out of Phyrexia All Be One as well. Corrupted. They were triggered abilities that cared about the number of opponents who had at least 3 poison counters. 3 was your goal you were looking to hit with Corrupted. At each end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of their library face down. You can look at and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So Ixal is trying to play like Gonti, where you get to do the Gonti stuff if your opponents are poisoned.
Yeah, I hate this card. I think it's so bad. It is like objectively a pretty bad card. 4 mana, 2/5 with flying and vigilance, does nothing on its own. And then it doesn't even trigger its own corrupted ability for 2 whole turn cycles of it being around. It's at the beginning of your end step. So on the third turn of this being down, it would trigger itself once. On its own, obviously in a vacuum, because Corrupted cares about 3 poison counters, and this one gives your opponents 2 poison counters.
Yeah.
So I've never seen anybody play this as a commander. I genuinely think it's a really bad card.
But it's an interesting take though, this right? Because like the cards with Corrupted care about your opponent having 3 poison counters, and the lose the game condition hits at 10. So it's like, what would you change differently about the card to make it play better? Like, would you have it trigger if an opponent just had a poison counter? Would that make it too strong?
No, what I would do for Ixal is I would give it Toxic 3 so that it triggered its own corrupted ability. I think that being hit by Ixal should mean that you're corrupted. That's what I'm saying, is that the disparity between the Toxic 2 and then Corrupted requiring 3 poison counters makes this pretty bad. But now, obviously, now you're playing this as a deck.
Now you're looking at a legendary creature that, just like other ones that are, say, at like 7 power, it takes 3 hits and the opponent is dead. So,
yeah. Which that's kind of a benefit of Infect, is like I said, rather than counting to 40 for life totals, you're only counting to 10 for each player. So it does kind of in that way mean that you can play these tiny little bodies while also playing things like Corrupted. What's neat too with Toxic as compared to Infect, which we'll talk about Infect in very momentarily, but the last thing I want to mention with Toxic is it's a triggered ability when someone hits. So if you're playing something like Delny or anything that like a roaming throne naming Phyrexian, Toxic would trigger twice, which is awesome with that. The neat thing with Infect, which was kind of the like you said, the first time they really put this out as a mechanic. Infect was a replacement effect that combined this like poisonous mechanic from Time Shift, this time shifted one, Time Spiral.
Mm-hmm.
Poisonous 3 was brought up in Time Spiral as an enchantment, I believe. And then
Poisonous 1.
And Poisonous 1. They combined that with Wither from Lorwyn, which was so Infect creatures that have Infect deal damage to players in poison counters and deal damage to creatures in -1/-1 counters.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the -1/-1 thing is really interesting, because I think a lot of people forget about that. They see Infect and they go, oh my god, I'm getting poison counters. But they forget about the whole other side of Wither that's included in Infect as a mechanic. But I like them both. I like Infect a little bit better because it scales with the power of the creature. It allows you to play things like Blighted Agent, for example, is one of my favorite Infect creatures. It's particularly good in Commander because if you're playing a blue, let's call it a blue-white Voltron deck, or like a blue-white equipment or auras or whatever you're doing, +1/+1 counters. Particularly good +1/+1 counters because you probably want to be proliferating anyway. The Blighted Agent's really great because it's a 2-mana 1/1 that you only need to get its power up to 10 rather than getting its power up to like 25 and then still needing to hit twice. It's really, really easy to get a creature's power to 10. And Blighted Agent is a 2-mana 1/1 with Infect and is naturally unblockable. So this is almost an auto-include for me if you're playing a blue Voltron deck.
I was going to say, do you play this in Volo?
I don't play this in Volo because it's not a Voltron deck. I wouldn't play this if I was not. It is in fact a human. There is a better Sakashima is the human rogue in that deck. It's way better.
Rubbish.
That deck, for anyone listening, I have a Volo Folk Hero deck that is all humans, but there are all individual classes. So you have to really pick which creature from each class you want, and that deck certainly wants Sakashima of 1,000 Faces more than it wants Blighted Agent.
Hey, he'd be able to write Phyrexian. in that journal. He's a human Phyrexian rogue.
Oh, did it get errata?
Of course it did. It has Infect.
That's so fair. Yeah, I guess you could, but no, see, okay, but going back to what I was saying before, this would just draw so much heat to play this. It wouldn't be good. By the point where I would get it up to 10, all of my other creatures are 10/10s as well, and I'm going wide in that deck. What I'm saying is, like, if you're playing like an Arden and what's the owl with partner? There's like a
Ishai?
Sure. Some blue-white Voltron deck. Blighted Agent is an unbelievable card in those decks because you only need to put, 10 power onto it for it to actually take somebody out of the game entirely. So in those decks, it's particularly strong because it almost acts as an anthem for itself, where like every power that you're putting onto it is really equivalent to 3 power that you're adding to it. So like even something that gives +3/+3 to this, now it's a 4/4 with Infect and Unblockable. You're now at 3 hits from this 4/4 and you're dead. Like, that is ridiculous in Commander. You still have to hit 3 people with it. So I still stand by, like, it still is not incredible, but it's a really cool play in Voltron decks like that.
Now, what about, this is the interesting avenue when it comes to talking about poison counters, because so far, all we've laid down for the groundwork on here is playing the assortments of creatures like Ixel, who have Toxic, or your Blighted Agent that naturally have Infect, but there's the whole other route that I alluded to with talking about with Ixel, is the idea of getting just at least one on everybody, and then going the Proliferate route. It's actually why the top commander for an Infect deck of all time is still Atraxa, Praetor's Voice. This is exactly the kind of deck, even though Atraxa, this one doesn't naturally have any kind of poison counter related to her own card. The fact that it is a legendary creature with objectively the best poison counter colors, and then proliferates at your end step, all it takes with a deck built in that direction is a card or a spell or a combat damage of some kind that gets at least the single starting counter on your opponents, and then you start going the Proliferate route. What do you feel about decks like that?
Yes, I think this is really where Infect becomes strong in Commander. Exactly like you just mentioned. Playing creatures that require hitting anybody for any strategy is going to be weaker than just going like an instant or sorcery or a combo route with it. But any deck that already wants to be proliferating heavily really benefits from anything that gives poison counters. And one of the best things from Phyrexia All Will Be One, March of the Machine, they introduced these instants and sorceries that just say each opponent gets a poison counter onto them. So like what I love about Infect, and the times where I actually breathe a sigh of relief whenever I get a poison counter, is when I'm playing against a Planeswalker deck. A deck that already wants to be proliferating and already is probably going to proliferate 7 or 8 times, maybe even 10 times over the course of the game. It gives them a win condition. Oh my God, Planeswalker players, start playing win conditions. Things like Prologue to Phyresis, I think, is a perfect card in any Planeswalker deck where you're going to be proliferating anyway, because it's 1 in a blue for an instant that just says each opponent gets a poison counter, draw a card. So it's a cantrip that just puts a poison counter on each opponent. And then as you're playing your Dreamtide Whales, as you're playing your Tezzeret's Ambitions, Tezzeret's Gambit, or whatever it's called, the Proliferate one. As you're playing those, which you're playing already anyway in a Planeswalker deck, you're just adding a ticking time bomb to actually win the game. And then you don't have to rely on like, well, I guess I have to just take a billion extra turns, and then I have to get all of my Planeswalkers up and alt them and do all these things that makes everybody at the table groan. I think that they will groan less by just going, cool, my Planeswalkers are now just utility pieces that I'm going to sit here and proliferate onto as you guys just take more poison counters.
Especially if that Planeswalker is doing both things you're looking to do, like Vraska, Betrayal's Sting.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Yeah, who just naturally proliferates on her own card, has that bottom ultimate that sets somebody, or is it each opponent? It's either a target or each.
It is target opponent,
it is target,
which is unfortunate.
Set somebody to 9, target, and then the moment you proliferate, you got there.
Yeah, totally. Vraska Betrayal's Sting is what we're talking about. It's 4 black and a Phyrexian black. It has that completed ability for Planeswalkers, where if you paid the Phyrexian with 2 life, it comes in with 2 less loyalty counters than if you paid another black. So it's either 5 mana and 2 life for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker, or 6 mana for a 6 loyalty Planeswalker. Its first ability is just 0, you draw a card, lose a life, and proliferate, which is just so excellent. -2 is a piece of removal. It makes a creature a treasure. And then its -9 is if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. So it just sets somebody to 9 poison counters, and then the next time that you use that 0 and proliferate, what's neat about Vraska, that just gorgeous design, is that 0's actually a +1 because you proliferate onto Vraska, and then you get a loyalty counter from it anyway.
Yep.
So it's such a sweet little, like, man, Wizards, you guys cooked on this one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is an excellent Planeswalker in a Planeswalker deck to begin with. Anything with +1/+1 counters, or experience counters, energy thing. I guess black doesn't really have a ton of energy cards, but if you're doing anything like that, Vraska's amazing anyway, because like you said, she kind of becomes this win condition regardless. And then if you are playing something like the Prologue Phyresis, or the other one that I think is really good is Infectious Inquiry. This is 2 and a black for a sorcery that says you draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life, and each opponent gets a poison counter. So again, similarly, just does everything you want to do. This is card advantage, and everybody gets a poison counter. And then as you're just going around your turns and Vraska's proliferating, you're going to be ending the game. It's a proactive strategy.
Yeah, I really like these, but then like you were mentioning about stuff like this is where people start, like as soon as they just get that one poison counter and they can see like your commander is something like the Atraxa, or if you're sitting behind any of these other proliferate heavy ones, like a popular one I saw come up that is an interesting different color combo for the proliferate go poison is Kilo Apogee Mind from Edge of Eternities.
Yeah.
Go Jeskai proliferate, where all it takes is just one poison counter on everybody, and then Kilo is doing proliferating potentially multiple times if you've got that deck built in such a way to like tap and untap and tap. It's very clean and easy to do like that. Xavier Sal is another popular proliferating one as well, with his multiple abilities there to either be doing proliferating or populating. So you could be creating extra token copies of your tokens that have infect or toxic, like the mites or things of that nature. And then they can start eating those mites for proliferating is a very interesting design there,
Yeah. The flavor of the like infected pirate killing people with poison damage is so sick to me. That's just pure biological warfare, straight from the mouth of Xavier Sal. That's awesome. Dude, something we've mentioned a handful of times, but I really want to talk about is experience counter decks, because we're mentioning decks that already want to be doing a ton of proliferation. Experience counters is one of the things you want to proliferate the most. So you have things like the one I'm really stoked on. I think that mono white is a really great shell for something like poison, because it's unexpected. So you have the element of surprise on your end as you're playing this mono white deck that's trying to win with poison counters. But then using experience, so you're proliferating onto yourself, experience counters, and you're proliferating poison onto other people. I think Aang Airbending Master is a surprisingly good poison deck. So he is 5 mana for a 4/4. When he enters the battlefield, you airbend another target creature. So that's exiling it, and then it can be played for 2 mana on a later turn. And then whenever one or more creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, you get an experience counter. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you make a 1/1 white ally creature token for each experience counter you have. The reason I think that Aang is a particularly good poison deck is he kind of seals all of the holes that you want to have sealed anyway. So he's a piece of removal when he enters, or it's blink for yourself. White has things like Metastatic Evangel, which is whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you proliferate. So it's 2 mana for a 3/1. So as you're playing Aang, you can airbend out actual creatures, bring them back in, and proliferate with this Metastatic Evangel. And then White had so many great toxic cards like Skrelv and Skrelv's Hive.
Your boy.
So you kind of... I love Skrelv so much, dude. He survived the invasion, dude. We will live to see Skrelv another day. So you have these cards that just create toxic creatures or are toxic. There was a plenty in white as well. Annex Sentry, I actually think is just a good card to begin with, let alone the fact that it has Toxic 1 on it. It's like a Fiend Hunter sort of ability on it's like 2 and a white for I believe it's a 1/4 with Toxic 1, and you get to exile either a creature or a non-land permanent. I'm sure you're looking it up now.
Yeah,
with mana value 3 or less.
Yeah, enters, exiles an artifact or creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until the Annex Sentry leaves the battlefield, and is a 3 mana 1/4 with Toxic 1.
Yeah, dude, he snipes Soul Rings. Like, Annex Sentry is really good to begin with, and like, what a great card to be blinking out and back in with Aang, or with a teleportation circle or anything like that. So there's this kind of strange like blink, proliferate, populate deck that's possible. And like I said, Aang, he makes you a bunch of allies on your upkeep, which just allows you to block really well. And you can actually deal with the hate that you will receive for playing poison counters in your mono white deck. I think things like that. Maren of Clan Neltoth is another really great one. You want to get those experience counters up as high as possible, as quickly as possible, so you want to be proliferating anyway. There's what's the Oracle? What is the landfall proliferate card?
Evolution Sage.
Evolution Sage. Like, that's an unbelievable card already in that deck. Because you can get back your she gets a non-land, right? Target creature card.
Yep.
You could kind of, with 0 experience counters, you could keep getting back a Dryad Arbor and then keep on proliferating onto your own experience counters to grow that counter up. And then as you're doing that, just throw poison counters around and actually have a way to win the game. Maren doesn't really need more ways to win the game, but it's cool to have the like redundancy of like, hey, you get board wiped and you just have poison counters down, then you're ahead of everybody else.
And then you proliferate yourself up to 3 experience counters, and then you're recurring Ichor Rats on a repeat, and then you all die to poison at the same time.
Yes. That's what I'm saying, is like, it's kind of awesome. Like, just it's just period awesome.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to real quick then dive away then from the ones who specifically say about Infect or Toxic and talk about a couple of the few that are sort of doing this element of poison counters in a cameo kind of way. I'd say probably one of the most popular ones being Finn the Fangbearer as this Death Touch Lord who like gives an actual win condition to playing all of your dinky little like Sedge Scorpions and Ambush Vipers and whatever that have Death Touch. Finn is 1 and a green for a 1/3 legendary human warrior with Death Touch, and whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters.
Yeah. So some Finn the Fangbearer math here, as I was mentioning with like Toxic and Infect, both needing, you can use smaller creatures with that. Typically, let's say you have a Sedge Scorpion. That's a 1 mana 1/1 with Death Touch.
Correct.
That would have to hit somebody 40 times in order to win the game. With Finn the Fangbearer down, it has to hit them 5 times to win the game. So it's almost like Finn is giving +8, +0 to every single one of your creatures. Mm-hmm. Isn't that awesome, dude?
And that is, and that's not limited to 1 or more creatures connecting with a person as well. So let's say like
that's each.
Your turn 1 is something like that new like Virulent Emissary from Lorwyn Eclipse, that 1 mana green 1/1 that's also a Soul Sister for some stupid reason.
So it's like Essence Warden with Death.
So let's say that's your turn 1, and then Finn is your turn 2. That Virulent guy gets in. That already is now put 2 poison counters on somebody. Then your turn 3 is another collection of either say maybe a 2-drop and a 1-drop that have Death Touch. Then those previous Death Touchers, including Finn himself, he tracks off of himself because he's got Death Touch too. So like you just start getting that 2 right out the get-go to each of your opponents because they probably won't block your creatures having death touch. They're not going to trade off their larger things for your tiny little 1/1. And then because, like you said, you're in green. Green is one of the greatest proliferate colors. I'd say green and blue have the strongest cards that do proliferating. You had just mentioned things like the Evolution Sage and other cards within green that are able to not only double counters, but do the proliferating as well, right? It's with how cheap Finn comes down as well, it's genuinely no surprise that he is one of the top poison commanders of all time.
Yes. You mentioned green being great at proliferating, and I didn't want to pass over the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite green creatures, period, which is Bloated Contaminator.
Yes, sir.
Bloated Contaminator, he fits all of these roles that we're talking about here. He's a 2 and a green for a 4/4 with trample. Bro is overstated to begin with. He has Toxic 1. So when he hits, he will put a trigger on the stack to get a poison counter. And then he just says, whenever Bloated Contaminator deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. So it's like a Thrumming Bird mixed with a Toxic 1 4/4 with trample. It's ridiculous. Like, this card is bananas. The beautiful thing about the design of this is all he has to do is deal 1 point of damage across to both give that player a poison counter and proliferate. So it's almost like he himself has Toxic 2, which is cracked. Toxic 2 is very good. They really kept the toxic cards to like 1. And then because he has trample, if somebody blocks with a 3/3, you're still going to get that 1 point across to get the poison counter and proliferate everything from there on. I love Bloated Contaminator so much.
Mm-hmm. What do you think then, talking about with these poison counters, instead of a whole deck built around it, what's your thoughts about decks using just single instances of Infect or Poison and then doing Proliferating to have that be their win condition card, right? Like, I think we've danced around enough talking about Triumph of the Hordes. What do you think of that card as just a one-shot win condition card?
I don't play Triumph of the Hordes. I like Overrun effects or like Overwhelming Stampede. I like those a little bit better. I think they just work better in the decks that I like to play. Triumph of the Hordes to me goes in like a go wide, maybe a green-white tokens deck. That's just, if you've got 10 extra. All right, here's what I'm dancing around. I don't think Triumph of the Hordes is that good of a card. If you're at the place where giving all of your creatures +1/+1 trample and infect wins you the game, there's probably a pretty high chance that you were going to win that game anyway. So like Triumph of the Hordes probably gives you some inevitability with that. But I think just the traditional overrun cards do a bit more work across more decks than Triumph of the Hordes does. I've yet to find a deck or build a deck that I was like, you know what this deck really needs? Triumph of the Hordes. That would not benefit from something like I also just play odd decks. Like I feel like the one deck that I would play this in, it's better with like Knight of Sweets Revenge anyway. Like, I just think there's better and more thematic ways to grow your team and win the game than something like a Triumph of the Hordes. It's awesome that it's 4 mana. That's really cheap to be able to do that. You just have to already be in a pretty advantageous position. Unless you're like, I don't know, I guess if you're playing like a green stompy deck and you have a bunch of like 4/4s, but again, even then, just swing with those. Like, you'll probably win the game anyway. This Triumph of the Hordes was not necessary, and you definitely do not need to proliferate on top. If Triumph of the Hordes is not winning you the game the instant that you play it, you probably should not be playing it in your deck. But I do think that there is other really great cards, like Infectious Bite is one of my favorites. It is similarly, it's another one of these each opponent gets poison counters, but it's like 1 and a green for an instant that is target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So it's a bite effect, and then just says each player gets a poison counter. So you want to play removal in your decks anyway, and this is removal that then tacks a poison counter onto everybody. That then you're playing your Bloated Contaminator, you're playing your Finn the Fang Bearers, that's going to get you more of those. It's just, this is the kind of inevitability that I'm looking for from Infect and Poison cards, not necessarily Triumph of the Hordes. I'm curious where you are on something like Tainted Strike in a deck.
Oh, dude, man, that's another one of my favorites. Of just like, if you just have this as like a one-off, and it's a way that you can end the game. The one that I'm familiar with and know that I have kicking around in a deck, it's from a deck that I have built for a friend of mine, is Nekisar. And that's where Tainted Strike kind of acts as a win condition for that card. Nekisar kind of already being this sort of like big boogeyman of the format where nobody likes getting pinged for the amount of cards that they're drawing. But I don't know, just something real silly and fun of going, oh, for the start of my turn, I'm going to put Tainted Strike, or to that end, any of the other sort of like enchantments or equipment that can naturally give other creatures Infect. But like Tainted Strike in specific, it gives a target creature 1/0 and Infect until end of turn. So on a card like Nekisar, where because of the way that Infect is worded, I don't know if you even mentioned this part about Infect as a whole, they say they just straight up deal the damage. It does not have to be combat damage. So cards like Nekisar and other legendary creatures who, when you trigger their abilities, are just dealing direct damage out to your opponents, you know? So like, you go Nekisar and then give him the Tainted Strike and then a wheel and then another wheel. And now all these opponents who are drawing all these cards are taking direct damage, not loss of life, but direct damage from Nekisar directly. That damage coming directly to them is coming in the form of poison counters. And that's an interesting take on how you can use an Infect card as well. It's like your deck is not built around doing the poison counters in mind, but if you've got the setup for it ready to go, you just hit him with that one-shot Infect effect, I'd say, and then it takes overall less resources at that point to finish the game.
Yeah, I think similarly to Nekisar, one of the newer commanders that's really taken over the leaderboard for most played commanders is Ishtola Nightblast. This is it's from Final Fantasy, but it says whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 3, old school. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, she deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. So if you play Tainted Strike or Phyresis or Glistening Oil or anything onto her that gives her Infect, all of a sudden, every time that you play any non-creature spell, it just tacks on 2 poison counters to everybody and on top of that. Obviously, with Nekisar, you just give him the Tainted Strike and then you play like Wheel of Fortune and then you win the game and like everybody draws 7 cards. It's probably 9 because you probably doubled it in some way. It's probably 10. And then everyone just loses because they get all of those.
Yeah,
so anything that's the
interesting
damage.
That's the interesting part with the cards. It's like you set up one of those ping damage creatures like Nekisar with the Infect on the chance that like all it's going to take is a lesser amount of your resources in hand to make sure everybody takes that 10 points of damage during that turn. But what happens if you can't get there? Now suddenly that Infect related card, like you don't have a quick access to get that back to your hand and no real other pieces in the deck. It's like you either have to go like all in with the card of like, hey, this is the win condition of how that damage to opponents is going to win, or always just have to make sure that the resources that you are ready to start firing off when that card gains Infect, that you guarantee that you're going to have. And again, very similar to Triumph of the Hordes. You're not firing off a card like Triumph of the Hordes unless you got the reassurance that that card is going to finish you the game. And in that aspect, that's really not much different than any of the other like 1-2 card combo setups that say, oh, this synergy happens infinitely, I win because of it, right? It's just
exactly.
It's just fascinating that just because it is written out in a way that poison to a player scares us all so much, so heavily with the format, is why it has such this interesting dynamic of either hate or love. And it really doesn't fall much different than 2-card combos.
Yeah, and that is the exact point that I was trying to make at the beginning of this, is like, I should be allowed to play my Plague Mirrors and not get targeted by it. Because Infect is neat. It's not necessarily in a deck that's not built around winning with Infect. Infect does practically nothing. It actually makes creatures worse that they have Infect if you're not built around actually winning with the Infect. Like, I don't play Plague Mirror because I want to. I play Plague Mirror because I have to in the decks that want artifact creatures. So having things like a 2-card combo is, like I said, you only have to count to 2. You have to find those 2 cards and then you win the game, or 3 cards, or whatever your combo is. With Infect, you are climbing the biggest hill to win the game. You have so far uphill to go. I actually think, like, interesting question for you. Do you think that Burn or Infect is worse in Commander? Because Burn is bad in Commander.
Burn is a tough one to do as well, yeah, because, like, you're not just traditionally sitting on a deck that's just trying to do, Lightning Strike face, Lightning Bolt face, even stuff like, Roiling Vortex face, you know what I mean? That strategy is just not going to work as far as Commander is concerned. When you're trying to do direct burn in Commander, it's going to play in a similar fashion where you've got pieces set up like Gutter Snipes and Impact Tremors that are doing direct damage to everybody, or you've set up like an infinite mana outlet and now you're doing like, Jaya's Immolating Inferno to everybody for infinite damage, and that's the win condition of how your deck is trying to do. And playing around with an Infect strategy is in a very similar fashion. You're not going to achieve a victory just hitting somebody one little go at a time with a Blighted Agent or a, like you had said, even Finn. Like, honestly, even Finn decks can struggle in that regard, right? Like, if you take Finn off the table, now you're just doing a deck of just bad green Death Touch creatures, and you gotta figure out how to make that strategy work. So it's just, I love the poison counter aspect of this, as this just like, it's this puzzle of how much of the mechanic do you include into your deck, and what's your backup plan for when it either stops working or you get hated out of the pod.
Yes, exactly. I think the reason why people love playing Infect is, like, if we're talking about the archetypes of Magic players, it bridges this gap in between Timmies and Johnnies, where Timmies want to play these big dumb creatures, and Johnnies want to build engines that work exclusively together, and when you pull one of the cogs out, it stops working. You want to assemble all of the cogs that get to, like, building a Rube Goldberg machine. That's how building an Infect deck works, but you have to play either these creatures or these, instants and sorceries that give that give poison counters and then proliferate them, and you have to take a bunch of game actions. But then you have the things like the Bloated Contaminator. It's like, that's a Timmy card. That is an overstatted 4/4 with trample for 3. Like, that alone is very good. And you get to bridge this gap in between, like, I'm not just playing dumb creatures for the sake of playing dumb creatures, and I'm not just playing bad combo pieces. I'm actually playing both of those together.
I wanted to round out our conversation for the day as far as talking about poison. I made sure to take notes ahead of time of this and consulted the expert of poison, my wife, about her 5 favorite cards who deal with poison counters.
Sorry, one second, John. My wife. Go on.
My wife? She's the expert in the household as far as this is concerned. And I quizzed her just wanting to know what her top 5 favorites are as far as the cards that deal with poison. Finn as kind of their honorable mention in this category as well, because she plays a Finn Popper deck that is Popper poison. Very fun. Her top 5 in no particular order. Blightsteel Colossus. We love this friend. Some people tend to forget that Blightsteel even has Infect. Period. It just
it's an 11/11 with Infect, right?
Trample, Infect, Indestructible. It's a 12/12, or it's a 12 mana 11/11, and if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, it shuffles into your library. So it's hard to reanimate. Not impossible, but you can.
Wait, how would you reanimate it? It's a replacement effect of going to the graveyard.
I think there's an opportunity where you can target it. I think.
1 second. Let me look
if
at
it would be put into a graveyard. Maybe I am mistaking it for something else.
You can't reanimate.
Am I mistaking it for Eldrazi? I think the
Eldrazi are a trigger of when they get put in the graveyard.
That's what I'm mistaking it for. My mistake,
that's
everybody.
A big difference. It's like Progenitus is the same way, where it has, like, if it would be put into a graveyard, it never touches the graveyard.
Okay. All right. Well, my mistake. I'm misreading the card. But still, overall, the point is, though, Blightsteel Colossus is a lot of people's favorite, just big, dumb, idiot artifact creature. And I mean, I'm no different. I play a Blightsteel in a couple decks. Mine's the Megatron print. Here it is.
Yeah, baby.
Very fun. Next up, Skitherix, the Blight Dragon, another of people's all-time classics, especially trying to play mono black Infect as well. Skitherix is awesome. 3 and double black, 4/4 dragon Phyrexian skeleton. Flying, Infect, and 2 activated abilities. Skitherix gains haste until end of turn for a black mana, or for black, regenerate Skitherix.
Really strong. I think the regenerate there is actually a lot stronger than the fact that it has Infect on it. Being able to consistently keep this creature around and save it is a very strong ability.
Yeah.
If you play a big dumb dragon, it's going to hit people. They're going to die anyway. Infect is kind of one way or the other.
Skitherix is very interesting because he almost kind of leads sort of into that same vibe as the original, the Elder Dragons, right? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the 21.
You get hit 3 times with it and you're dead.
Yeah, because of like the same thing aspect of those dragons is 3 hits of 7 is 21. That's where the commander damage aspect comes through. 3 hits from Skitherix is 12 poison counters that'll just kill you in and out there. Very sick, very cool. Phyrexian Swarmlord as her next pick. 4 and double green for a 4/4 Phyrexian insect horror. It has Infect, and at your upkeep, you create a 1/1 green insect with Infect for each poison counter your opponents have. That's really sick. That's very cool.
Yeah.
It just everybody
Stupid.
One opponent is sitting on like 2, one opponent has 4, the other one maybe has 3. That's now this thing popping out like 7, 8 Infect insects. That's what I hate about this card. This one is just it's so tough to say it's the insect Infect. Ugh.
That's right.
It just is bad mouthfeel. I don't know how else to describe that. Phyrexian Crusader, another big favorite of hers. 1 in double black, 2/2 zombie knight, Phyrexian zombie knight. First strike, protection from red and white, and Infect.
So strong. That protection from red and white, you're going to keep that baby around for a while.
Mm-hmm. And then very interestingly, her last card that is one of her favorites, which is very kind of interesting as my closing statement I want to round out here with Infect, Phyrexian Unlife.
Yeah, I almost brought this up. We didn't talk at all about giving yourself poison counters because it's not typically worthwhile. But if you have any ways to like remove counters from yourself, Phyrexian Unlife is insane.
Fun fact, by the way, there are no real other traditional cards that are able to like there are cards that can be played that can remove counters from an opponent. There is only one card that allows you to directly remove poison counters from yourself.
Is it Malira?
No, Malira prevents the counters. That's not removing them. There is straight up one card that removes poison counters from your player. It is the card Leeches.
Leeches.
It's a 1 in double white sorcery that removes poison counters from a target player, and then you take damage equal to the counters removed this way.
Interesting. So that wouldn't really necessarily help with Phyrexian Unlife. But like I said, Malira, you've got Solemnity, things that say like other counters can't be put on players that may. I mean, Phyrexian Unlife is known most for the lockout, the counters on.
The lockout,
but it's actually giving you poison counters.
Yeah, but it's fascinating that it's kind of like it technically is an Infect card, kind of, because it says that if you would be taking damage when you have 0 or less life, it also says that you don't lose for having 0 or less. But if you have less than 0 life, damage dealt to you is dealt as if that source had Infect. So it's kind of like reverse Infect a little bit, where it doesn't give Infect to the sources of your opponents, but like played fair, it gives you 10 extra hit points. So in a weird kind of roundabout sort of way, that's like bonus 10 extra life when playing it the fair way. But yes, obviously, as you had said, Unlife is paired most commonly with those lockout cards that say you can't receive counters anymore. 9 Lives plays in a very similar fashion to that as well, where it's like the cards that stop counters from being placed on permanents or players. Phyrexian Unlife lives in that kind of bubble, but it's also just kind of fascinating to look at it as a poison card per se.
Totally. Yeah, really, really fast. I love Phyrexian Unlife. I think it's a really sweet card that people need to play more. But it is a banger of a card. What a neat way to round us out there, John. In closing thoughts here, I think people need to play more Infect to win the game, and people need to be more cool with other people playing Infect. There's no harm in having a poison counter or two put on you. Do not. My advice for playing against decks that have any type of poison counter synergy in them is I start to get worried once I have like 7. That's when I'm like, oh man, I really need to start focusing on this. If somebody plays something with Infect or plays something with any type of poison counter ability on it, they are not the threat until they are. So I typically let that person sit for a second because it just draws so much attention away from people who are playing like turn 1 Soul Ring Arcane Signet, and then the next person plays a Plague Mirror, and you're like, oh my god, it's a Plague Mirror, and you target that thing, and it's like, no, this person has like 5 mana, like they're gonna win with a 2-card combo way faster than the Infect deck is going to win. So it's a fascinating play pattern. I think it creates like an interesting skill check for the game of like when to do threat assessment. But yeah, man, I'm a big fan of poison counters in Commander.
Excellent.
And it should not be changed to 20. I like that it's 10 still.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's perfectly fine at 10 the way it is, just because, like, yeah, when you are doing it in the broken way, you've jumped through so many hoops to get you to that point anyway, then it's no different as if you had just done an infinite 2-card combo. And if you're doing, like, it's a fun like showcase of this sort of subcategory of creatures. If somebody says, oh, this is my XL Infect Phyrexia deck, you know what I mean? It's like you're almost leaning more towards bracket 1 exhibition where you're showing sort of like, here's my Phyrexian themed poison counters deck, and like it's fun, it's interesting. I personally, again, living in a household from someone who has built several iterations of Poison, Infect, Toxic as a whole, they've never been unfair. That's what I think is just like the most fascinating outlet of this mechanic, of just seeing how much flaming and hate it gets from people who have been burned by extremely powerful poison decks. That I think they're not all going to be that way. And if they are built that way, again, it's no different as if you had lost to your own 2-card combo engine. So just like, give it a go. Give one of these a try at some point. Again, build a Finn deck. Finn the Fangbearer is an excellent casuals deck. You know what I mean? And
I actually think he's the best of them.
Yeah, as far as like the legendary creatures are concerned, but just like try out some of these other like one-off cameo cards who assign poison counters out to other people, right? We didn't even talk Bloodroot Apothecary. That thing is just like so silly, as is just like one-off piece that is a punisher for people who are doing tokens and things of that nature. But
is it 2 poison counters for sacrificing a non-creature
poison
token?
Yeah, 2 poison per non-creature artifact token that is sacrificed. It's very sick.
I've never really been stressed about a Bloodroot Apothecary. I've never also really seen one. I just feel like it's not a card that gets played very often. But the fact that it has Toxic 2 on its own to begin with, like, I hope we see more of this. I hope that Wizards is not shy of printing like interesting Toxic, Infect, Punisher effects like this,
or just to that end.
It's just so neat.
To that end, like cameo cards that say that players get a poison counter for doing that. That's what it looks like. They seem to be leaning these cards more towards, like with these ones that like now that they are not printing cards anymore that do like Infect on them per se. Like these one-off effects that say if your opponent does this thing, they'll receive 2 poison counters. Right? There was a I don't have it off dome, but there was a card in Murders of Karloff Manor that was like that. Again, we saw that in Edge of Eternities with the silencer, that robot assassin. You were
thinking of Persuasive Interrogator, which is a bad card. It's 6 mana for a 5/6, enters the battlefield, investigates, and then whenever you sacrifice a clue, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. I don't harm you for not knowing that. I don't fault you for it, because it is a bad card.
I don't know. I think we'll see poison again, probably, like with especially like poison is an interesting ability they could especially throw onto some certain types of cards, knowing with how much Universes Beyond we have coming up. There's a lot of franchises and brands who have this sort of like there are there's lore and there's characters and things of that nature that could live within the realm of poison. I'm thinking about superheroes coming up, like in the summertime specifically. There's a lot of like the villain cards who could deal in that realm of like, oh, they're like a toxic acid entity, or like they're like the poisonous nature, things of that nature. So like I bet we will see poison again coming up here real soon. Maybe even with Star Trek, or like who knows? I don't know anything about the aliens of the multiverse that when it comes to that space themed set, but like that could very easily also be a set where like the aliens from outer space planets have the toxic bad touch.
Dude, I want to see more poison as a downside stapled onto really good cards that you want to play. Like in the eternal debate of how do we print new fetchable dual lands, the conversation always comes up of what about a fetchable dual land that gives you a poison counter when you tap it for mana, things like that. I would love to see something like that, so that, like, because like you said, Phyrexian Unlife is the only card that has a downside of giving yourself poison, and I think it's a very fascinating design space that's underused. So I think in my dream scenario where we get either a Universes Beyond, Dark Souls, or Elden Ring or something like that, I would love to see like some type of a land that either says when you tap it or when like on your end step you get poison counters for having this really good card in play, because then it's kind of a race against
like a Cydia Brass that gives you a poison counter at your end step.
Totally, yeah, or even like Ancient Tomb that instead of dealing 2 damage to you gives you 2 poison counters, something like
fascinating.
That. It's like really fascinating, could speed up and give you the opportunity to play these really broken cards. That would also mean you have a finite number of times that you can use them before you lose the game, or you have to build around some way to mitigate the downside of it. I bring up Dark Souls and Elden Ring because Miyazaki is famous for his poison swamps, and it's such a good part of the game that's like, okay, you can get really good loot here and you can get a ton of XP here, but you really have to resource manage yourself so that you don't die here. And I love that design element in just any game design that is severely underutilized in Magic. I think that's all I've got to say about Infect today, and Infect and Poison. And the last question I wanted to ask you, I think this is a fascinating kind of thought experiment.
Okay.
Knowing where we're at with the bracket system, where would you put Infect as a mechanic on the scale of the bracket system? Where do you feel like it leans most?
I think just because, like we were talking about, I think it's dependent on how the deck is constructed. Like, as we talked about from the top of the episode sort of here, they put out their own precon that was focused on doing Toxic and Infect and giving out the poison counters. And, you know, based on their own assessment, decks put out by them, generally speaking, fall within that core-ish range.
Yeah.
I think even Infect built, not necessarily to the I'm winning the game on the spot with it broken, but like even if you have constructed a deck from the ground up that is Infect, Toxic, Poison counter, even proliferating as a whole, I don't think that can ever exceed bracket 3. I don't think. Like
agreed.
Like, you can optimize it to the best of your capability, but you know, it's Poison is never going to be seen as a competitive way to finish a game. So I think a middle of the ground bracket 3, definitely most of the time it hovers around bracket 2, I'd say.
For sure. Yep, you echoed exactly what I was going to say. I think this is a bracket 2 ability that gets very severely misrepresented across the table as being bracket 4. Well, I think that's an excellent place for us to wrap up this conversation here. I hope that this has been a fun episode for you to listen to. Maybe it's a bit informative and help some of your threat assessment as you play against some Infect cards, or perhaps it's inspired you to put together some poison counters in maybe your Planeswalker deck and win that way. Either way, let us know what your thoughts are on, we've cast our thoughts and it's time for you to cast yours. But let us know in the comments down below or on our Discord, also linked down below, what you think about Infect and Infect decks and poison counters. You can also find us on social media at mtgthoughtcast.bsky.social. That's on Blue Sky, and our individual ones are there as well. Or you can send us an email over at mtgthoughtcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for being here, and we will see you so soon on another episode of the MTG Thoughtcast.